Today, we're going to talk about the idea of the scapegoat. Now, this is a concept that's, as old as human history itself, but it has this incredibly powerful and often totally hidden influence on our world right now. So, we're going to unpack where this idea even comes from, how it works on a psychological level, and, maybe most importantly, where we see it playing out in one of the most critical systems we have. Think about it for a second. It's such a basic question, right? In our own lives, in our neighborhoods, across whole countries. Whenever the pressure is on and things start to fall apart, our first instinct, so often, is to find someone or something to hold responsible. So here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to start with the deep-seated psychology of blame and the literal, ancient roots of the term scapegoat. Then we'll look at how that primal urge can get built right into our modern institutions, specifically focusing on the justice system. The word scapegoat sounds like a metaphor, doesn't it? Just a figure of speech. But it's not. It actually comes from a very real, very old ritual that was designed to, cleanse a whole community of its sins by literally placing them onto an animal. Psychologically, what's going on here is this powerful coping mechanism. Some call it an ego defense. See, when we're dealing with these really uncomfortable feelings, our own guilt or insecurity or anger, it can just feel so much easier to push all of that onto an outside target. It's a way of letting ourselves off the hook by basically saying, hey, it's not my fault, it's their fault. And this is where the term literally comes from, the Old Testament's book of Leviticus. The whole ritual centered around two goats. As you can see, two were chosen. The first one, a pretty straightforward sacrifice. But it's that second goat that's the key. The high priest would symbolically lay all the sins of the community onto its head and then drive it out into the wilderness to carry all that guilt and sin away. It was this perfect, physical release of a whole community's bad vibes. Okay, so that's the ancient ritual, but how does that translate into something that happens inside our own heads today? Let's break down the anatomy of how this powerful social machine really works. So it usually unfolds in about 3 steps. First, you've got those negative feelings, and you just displace them. You redirect them onto a target. But to make that feel okay, you have to do the second step, dehumanize that target. They become an other, an object, maybe even a monster. And that just paves the way for the final step, getting rid of the blame. The act of persecuting the target gives this incredible, even if it's temporary, feeling of relief, and honestly, a feeling like you're on the right side of things. And this quote just nails the psychological payoff, doesn't it? By creating a villain to blame for everything, the people doing the blaming automatically get to be the heroes of the story. It takes a complex, messy world and simplifies it into this very comforting black and white story of good versus evil. All right, so we've got an ancient ritual on one hand and a deep-seated psychological need on the other. But what happens when that impulse gets baked into not just individuals, but our most powerful institutions? Because when that primal urge to blame combines with the machinery of a modern system, it becomes something else entirely. It's not just about one person's psychology anymore. It's about institutional power. And, that's a whole different level of dangerous. And this is where our whole conversation pivots. This quote, it draws this absolutely chilling line from the history of racial violence in America straight to the modern-day death penalty. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, the same deep, dark impulse is at work. Which brings us right to the core argument of our source material today, that the death penalty in America isn't something that's applied randomly. The argument is that it actually reflects and even reinforces the social hierarchies that already exist. So who actually ends up on death row? Well, the data paints a pretty stark picture. For starters, virtually all of them are poor. About half are members of racial minorities. And this is crucial. The overwhelming majority are there for crimes committed against white victims, which suggests a real difference in how certain crimes are valued by the system. On top of all that, so many of these inmates suffer from severe mental illness or intellectual disabilities, making them some of the most vulnerable people imaginable. And here's the key point that legal scholars make. These are not a bunch of coincidences. They argue these are the predictable outcomes of a system where things like race and class are incredibly powerful forces shaping who gets the ultimate punishment. It's like a modern, systematized way of picking a scapegoat. So let's drill down even further, because there's one factor that stands out more than almost any other: money. This quote from legal experts, it really doesn't get much more direct than this. It suggests that whether or not you can afford a good lawyer can literally be the difference between life and death. And here's the same idea put even more bluntly. Those without the capital get the punishment. It's a phrase that just powerfully sums up the whole argument that your economic status could be the main thing that decides if you face execution. So on this slide, you see these two ideas right next to each other. And the contrast is just, wow. On one side, you've got the ideal of American justice. Everyone is equal before the law. But on the other side, you have the reality that critics describe. A system that creates a kind of hierarchy, one that protects some people while making others way more vulnerable to the harshest punishments. And really, this is the final conclusion drawn by the source material. These deep, systemic issues of race and class, they aren't just small problems. They are a fundamental shadow that hangs over the entire system, calling its basic fairness into question. And that leaves us with one last really challenging question to think about. If a justice system is supposed to be for everyone, what does it mean when its ultimate penalty is so consistently applied to the poorest and most vulnerable among us? Is it really serving justice, or is it just fulfilling that ancient, primal need to find a scapegoat to carry all the blame?